Network. And then we'll also be joined for a short bit by Aubrey Cumberledge, who's a first two student at WVU. Next slide. Starting with our agenda, we're going to start by looking at what is a culture of learning, and then a very brief overview of improvement science. Then we'll be looking at Plan, Do, Study, Act, PDSA cycles, and we're going to do a deeper dive today into the study phase of a PDSA. Then we're going to have a chance to practice talking about data, and then we'll wrap up. Next. We wanted to start by having you all participate in a word cloud. So Sean is going to give us instructions. But to answer that question, what are characteristics of a culture of learning? Sean,
sorry,
how are you?
Give me 1 minute. I'm
okay.
setting it up.
So think about words or phrases that would describe a culture of learning. So there are the instructions. Pull everywhere.
You can also use your phone and text if you'd like.
Are you putting the link to that in the chat?
Oh, it's on the screen.
Oh, am I drawing? Oops.
So you need to look at the shared screen.
I see it, but I just can't grab it.
Go to pollev.com.
Okay.
Sean, are you putting it in the chat?
Yes, I'm going to. Here's again.
All right, we're starting to get some responses. These are good ones. I like laughter and humility and mistakes. Persistence. Curiosity, determination, improvement. I think that was dumb mistakes, maybe. Decision, or data, open-minded, data-driven. Failure. Okay, I love how, I wasn't expecting this, but part of being a culture of learning is being willing to try and fail. So I love some of those words, curiosity. All right, well, you have all just defined culture of learning. Working together, being humble, being willing to make mistakes, using data-driven decision-making, determination, persistence. So those are all great. So Sean will save that for us for the archives and to guide as we think about developing a culture of learning. So back to the slides. All right, next slide. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about culture. Here's a quote from Frances Hesselbein. Culture does not change because we desire it to change or desire to change it. Culture changes when the organization is transformed, in our case, the network. The culture reflects the realities of people working together every day. Our hope in First Two is that the realities of our work would reflect this value of learning and testing and trying again. And we want to work to transform our organization, our network. We already are transforming it, but we want to continue that work so that This is something that is part of the reality of our work. Next. All of us play a role in developing a culture of learning. We can build inquiry, especially disciplined inquiry, into all of our activities. Being curious, like the word cloud said, and using data. We can promote the value of using data to learn and improve by stating that it's important, by encouraging people to use data, to use inquiry. We can help ourselves and others develop knowledge and skills to use data to inform decision-making. We can model a commitment to using data by making data-informed decisions. And we can be intentional about learning from others. Next slide. So here's just some concrete strategies for how to do this. The first one is we could include data discussions in meetings as a meeting norm. So in our working groups or in different committees, having every meeting or many meetings, having an agenda item that is about discussing data. The first two evaluators have just completed a year 2 first 2 report. In that report are just tons of charts, graphics, data. Your meetings could take a sliver of that report and look at it and digest it and talk about it and talk about how those findings might apply to the work you're trying to do. You could build you could build a habit of asking, what data could we obtain to inform this issue? Or better yet, what data do we already have that we could use to shed light on what we're trying to do? Asking, do we have evidence to support this decision? And then sharing and using findings regularly. And this is something that as a network, we are trying to get better at to facilitate how we're going to share and learn from each other. Next. We are in a network, and a network has tremendous potential for accelerating learning. So in the left-hand column here, we see individual learning. Individuals learn every day. Students and faculty are learning every day, or maybe not every day, but frequently, about the barriers and successes to promoting STEM persistence. Many insights about how best practices occur, but they're in these kind of random, unexpected places. And practical knowledge is developed in isolation. So we have these different islands of knowledge, but when we leverage the network, we can share that knowledge across many people and different organizations. We can more easily identify insights and test them, and then spread them to others for further testing and refinement in other contexts. We have done that with immersive experiences. And then we use scientific inquiry to organize all of this collective knowledge in a way that can really accelerate what we're learning about best practices in improving STEM persistence. Next. And then keep going. So I'm just going to revisit improvement science because this is a discipline that the first 2 network has adopted, and it helps us understand what we need to know in order to improve practice. So it's a discipline, and it also provides tools and approaches for doing this. Some key features are it's focused on a specific problem, like the lack of STEM persistence. It takes a systems approach. So we're not just looking at what are some good practices to improve STEM persistence, but we're looking at what are the structures and infrastructure and systems that affect these practices that affect students. And so it's really taking a systems lens for long-term change. It also features disciplined inquiry, and that's where PDSAs come into play, and we're going to be talking a lot about that. And measurement plays a critical role in improvement science. One leader of improvement science has stated, you cannot scale what you cannot measure. That's because measurement forces us to be really clear about what we're trying to do. And then lastly, networked improvement communities are a part of the improvement science discipline, and that's what we are. Next. This is just briefly a model for improvement. So this just says the different phases that first two has been going through, starting with what is the problem, then figuring out the theory of improvement, which is how are we going to address that problem, then identifying specific change ideas to try in our environments to see if they work, and then testing those changes using the PDSA cycles, using a measurement system. And then once we have tested and iterated, we find successful practices and then we spread and scale them. Next slide. Just pointing to the PDSA because that is what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to turn it over to Jared.
Hello, everybody. So on the next slide, please. I'm going to give you a very quick overview of these PDSA cycles that Debbie has been mentioning and Sue Ann mentioned yesterday in her openings talk. So PDSA stands for Plan, Do, Study, Act. And it's a cycle because we do this very iteratively. It's not one and done, it's ongoing. In plan, we have to get very precise, like Debbie said, about what are we actually trying to do. And then we want to make a prediction up front about what we think is going to happen. And if we don't have a clear prediction, then we need to make sure we have a good purpose for why we are trying our thing. And then we have to document our measurement plan because we are going to be data-based in our decision making. And number one, if you do not write it, it doesn't exist. And number two, data will rarely collect themselves for you. So we need to plan up front for not just how we're going to do the change, but how we're going to measure whether or not that change results in improvement. Once we've done that planning work, we're going to go into the do phase where we do what we said, that what we planned to. So we're going to execute that change idea. We're going to collect our data, and then we're going to document throughout what we are noticing about the process of doing it, the process of collecting data, the unexpected, because again, if we don't write it down, it doesn't exist. And also, a lot of us will have individual experiences we want to bring to the team. So we want to write it down to increase our shared knowledge. In study, which I'm going to dive into more deeply shortly, we're going to look at our data. We're going to compare the different results we have, and then we're going to determine collaboratively what we've learned. And then the study propels us into acting because PDSA cycles are action-oriented. We are doing this not just to learn, but to improve. So based on what we have tested, based on what we've collected, based on what we've learned, are we going to adapt our change idea further? Are we going to adopt it for wider use, or do we need to abandon it entirely and try something new? Next slide, please. PDSA cycles have been increasingly popular in education for many reasons, and I'd like to highlight three. First, PDSA cycles support disciplined inquiry. So there is a structure, and there is planning, and there is documentation. What did we do? What are we going to do? What did we do? And did it work? So it provides a discipline to the work we're already interested in doing. Secondly, PDSA cycles are evidence-based. Like Debbie said, we have to measure it to be able to scale it, to be able to do it reliably, which forces us to be precise in our thinking. And it also forces us to be precise in our outcomes. Are we actually making improvements here? And lastly, PDSA cycles are rapid tests of change. And the way I like to think of it is that we can build and maintain momentum to make good decisions quickly rather than perfect decisions never. Because we can what if until the cows come home, and sometimes the cows will never come home. So we need to always make sure that we are being thoughtful, we are being disciplined, but also that we are acting. Next. The study phase is where we're focusing the presentation for today. And there are 5 key tasks in the study phase: summarizing data, observing data, interpreting data, assessing relative to our predictions, and documenting our key learnings. And I'm going to give you a broad definition of each of those steps now. Next slide, please. The first step is actually pre-work. So before you have a data discussion during the study phase, a smaller team should review and summarize the data you collected. And to respond to Jade's chat comment about the word of the day is curating. So in this phase, think of yourself like a museum curator. You know, a museum curator would not just strew artwork around a room and expect visitors to just walk in uninformed and make sense of all of it. Because often, like I'll speak for myself, I don't have the skill to make sense of all of these paintings with no context or thought or intention. So a good museum curator might think, you know, I want people to walk clockwise around the room, and I want them to see the evolution of Impressionism over time. So we're going to put the earlier works here and the later works here. And I want people to compare Monet to like a Jackson Pollock modern art style. So I'm going to put those paintings near each other, because when I put them near each other, I help people make better comparisons. And specific to data, you know, we should think about what should be presented together, what comparisons do people want to make, and also how do we summarize it? Because Jared may love lots of big tables, like smaller numbers of big tables. Debbie might like larger numbers of smaller tables, and Deb, who's next on my Zoom list, may prefer charts and graphs. So do we provide multiple entry points to the data? And it's important to think of this pre-work process. We're not censoring or filtering data. This is actually data equity in action. We are improving accessibility and democratizing access to data. And we put data equity on the front end so that we can ensure we have data equity on the back end. Next slide, please. So now we want to make observations. So we're going to start our conversations by explicitly talking about the data themselves. And one of the best ways to do that is to build a culture where we ask each other and ourselves, how do you know? And that's a supportive question. So if Jared says that obviously, quote unquote, you know, people at institution A did it better than institution B for whatever the it is, and Debbie says, Jared, how do you know? One of two things will happen. One, I'll be able to say, well, Debbie, like, let's look at, you know, table 2, and what I'm noticing here is blah, 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 blah. She has now supported me in making data-focused statements. Or the second thing that might happen is say, I might stumble and say like, well, that's a good question. And that's supportive because she is helping me make sure that I'm tying myself to the data. And this is part of the mindset shift that comes with data-driven conversations and sense-making. Something I like to also think of as a norm around data discussions is watch your words, because words matter. So words like always, never, everyone, no one, I don't want to say to never use them because I wouldn't be taking my own advice here, but rarely use them because they're hardly ever true in the real world. And also watch words like obviously, because when Jared says obviously, that's usually code for it feels right, but I can't explain it and I hope no one asks me about it, right? And so we want to bring vulnerability and humility to our team when we do this. Next slide. Then after we've observed our data, we interpret it. And this extends our thinking beyond the immediate data, because good data use is like good teamwork. We need to focus on connections and relationships. So we want to connect data across different pieces of data, different time points. We want to connect to the purpose of why are we doing this cycle in the first place. So we have to understand the points, and then we can understand the connections better in this disciplined process. And again, thinking about norms, I like to think of it as sharing with confidence and listening with humility. We are all skilled people with expertise and with knowledge, and we should all share that with confidence, and we should all learn from each other's expertise and knowledge with confidence. So share with confidence and listen with humility. Next slide, please. We also want to make sure that we are going back to the plan phase. We are connecting back to the initiation of the cycle. What did we predict? And based on the data, were we right? We might be right in full, we might be right in part, and I didn't write this down, but we might be right not at all, and we can still learn from that. Something else in particular to attend to is maybe we were right for some students or some settings or some organizations sometimes, but not all of them. Which ones? Those differences can be incredibly instructive. Lastly, ask ourselves, do the data suggest answers for why the predictions did or did not come true? Because we don't want just the what, we also want to understand the why and how, because that will help us improve and do better next time. Next slide, please. Okay. And then the last thing to do at the end of the study phase is really make sure that we document our key learnings. And so again, there are many things we can learn, and I just want to highlight 3. One thing to highlight is, what interpretations does the team agree on? You don't have to agree on everything, and chances are you won't. If your team is broad and diverse enough and you're dealing with a really meaty issue, you probably won't agree on everything, and that's fine. When you do agree on something, that's a good core knowledge point. You want to make sure your team remembers that for your future selves and future work. In those areas where you might disagree on interpretation or have differing perspectives, don't focus on the disagreement. Focus on what additional data could we collect or look at to help resolve those differences. Because when we look at more evidence, we come to richer and fuller understandings. And it's not about, was Jared's interpretation right or is Debbie's interpretation right? It's about, how do we make sure the team's interpretation is right? We all get to be right together. We all win together. And lastly, I always like to encourage teams to focus on surprises. Surprises are often your best learning opportunities, because when you're surprised, you often have a hidden assumption, an unspoken belief. Maybe there's something about the culture of how you get the work done that you didn't realize was part of your culture, but not someone else's. So when you're surprised, that's a very teachable moment. And bring your surprises to the team, because other people might be surprised as well. And then in the last slide, I really want to highlight that throughout the PDSA process, but particularly in the study phase, we need to remember that working with data is we work, not me work. We do this work in teams for so many reasons. And again, I'm only going to focus on 3. First, people need to take ownership of any data they are going to be asked to act on. Remember, we are not just about armchair learning. We are about improvement. Improvement requires change, and change requires action. And organizational psychology has shown for decades that when you participate in the beginning of the process, you are more committed to engage in the output of that process. So when we bring the team to the data that are going to generate those actions, they are more committed to following through on those actions, because it's all about inclusion and sustainability. Second, the social process of interpreting data as a team supports everyone in meaning making. No one acts on data. We all act on meaning, because that's what it means to be human. And so when we make meaning together as social creatures in a social process, we all make better meaning of the data, which means we take better action. And that's a key element throughout the PDSA cycle. And last but not least, multiple perspectives support shared understandings and reduce the likelihood of bias in interpretation. The shared understanding is so important because we're trying to change big things together. So the shared understanding leads to a shared and consistent action, which supports shared and consistent improvement. It's a very causal chain there. And we can never completely remove the chance for bias, but the best way to reduce the chance of bias is to bring people with diverse understandings and perspectives who will ask, how do you know? How do you know? What are you surprised by? Until they're blue in the face. But that's how we really come to a richer understanding, because none of us is going to be 100% right, but importantly, we're also not going to be 100% wrong. And when we take all of those pieces of being right and put it together, like, that is the jigsaw puzzle that we can all learn the most from. So, on this point, that's the overview of what happens in the study phase. There's a lot there, and so I'm going to hand it back to Debbie, who's going to give you a specific protocol to support you in having these data-driven conversations.
I'm seeing the comments in the chat that, oh, we're making it, it looks so easy. I mean, Jared and I are passionate because we've seen this work. We've seen people use data, come out of meetings where they feel like, okay, we really understand how to use evidence now. And so, yeah, we're excited about it, and hopefully some of our enthusiasm is spilling out. And oh, poor Sam. Is it from one of us?
Yeah, you've got the Darth Vader voice a little bit.
Okay.
You can unmute again or something.
Okay. Is this any better?
No.
Okay, I will turn off my video. All right, did that help?
No.
Uh,
We can understand you though, but you might want to just pop out and pop right back in. We would wait.
Okay, I'm gonna be bummed to miss a little bit of this, but I think this would be a good time for Aubrey to come in. So we're gonna be discussing some actual data from the Hometown Ambassador Program, and Aubrey is going to tell us what that program is about and the data that was collected. So, and Aubrey has a class to get to soon, so I think this would be a good time for her to talk about that, and I'll jump off and jump back on.
Got it.
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, so my name is Aubrey Cumberledge. I'm a sophomore at WVU, and I did the Hometown Ambassador Program last year. So the Hometown Ambassador Program is where ambassadors who are currently college students get to visit high schools. And this can be their own high schools that they graduated from, or just ones in the area. They can be ones like some of their friends went to. Just visiting high schools is the main thing. And we talk about our experiences in college. We get to talk about our majors and how we found them, what we enjoy about them, what type of classes we're taking, information about our school, advice we've been given over our college experience, what we think our keys to a success have been, and how we've been involved in First Two. There's also a Q&A session at the end where students can ask us really any questions that they have. And at WVU, we focus like a good chunk of our presentations on what our club wished we knew before coming to college. For example, I talked a lot about scheduling and how important it is to understand what classes you're taking, what's required for your major, why it's required for your major, and what kind of student you are. Like, do you learn better in the morning? Are you more of an evening person? Just to really like get the most out of your schedule. And each presentation is tailored by the ambassador depending on their experiences and what they feel would benefit the students they're speaking to. We documented our experiences in PDSAs, both qualitative and quantitatively. We sent out surveys to teachers after the presentations that just briefly asked how they thought the presentations impacted them as an educator and how they feel it impacted their students. We also conducted surveys in the classroom for students where we asked them just on a scale of 1 to 5, how impactful or important did they think that our presentation was. For qualitative data, ambassadors just described what happened during their presentations and how they felt it went overall. And that part was as much detail as they could give was great. And that's basically it.
Thank you, Aubrey, and thanks for jumping in before you head off to your class. Is it my sound bad?
You're still a bit glitchy.
This has never happened, so I don't know what to do. I'll try. All right, so Aubrey's getting some kudos. Is my sound still bad? It's still bad, okay. Jared? Okay. Jared, can you talk about this slide? And I'm gonna start over. And maybe go on to the next slide.
Sure. So we want to, so one of the core things about disciplined inquiry is that previous slide. Thank you. Is that it should be disciplined. And so having specific protocols for what we talk about and how we talk about it really supports all participants in engaging in the conversation. Speaking for myself, I am Jared Talks a Lot. And so having protocols that really force me to slow down and really like encourage all voices at the table to be heard, it's a really helpful reminder and support to, again, have equitable access to the data and the conversation. It helps groups thoroughly observe data before jumping to conclusions. And we're going to see that a little more in the next slide. And then the protocols help make sure that we're doing this together. It is our protocol, it's our meeting, it's our agenda, and it really forces that shared understanding of what the teamwork is doing. To the next slide. Okay. And similarly to the overall focus of the study phase of the PDSA cycle, a data conversation also has a particular sequence to it. So we're going to remember, what was the purpose of this PDSA cycle? What questions are we trying to answer toward that end? We're then going to present the data that have been curated or summarized or turned into a visual representation. We are then going to discuss those data. We're then going to look ahead to next steps for the group, and then we're going to reflect on our discussion. And I want to be clear that the study phase may involve, almost certainly, multiple data conversations. So this is one way of doing one piece of the study phase and engaging with those conversations. Next slide. So the way the protocol is set up is trying to structure their conversation a little bit like a 3-act play. So we are going to start with observing data. So what do you see and what is catching your attention? Type of the data. Then for the interpretation, we move to the connections and the meaning. So we're going to look at trends, we are going to look at patterns, and we are going to look at surprises. You're never too early in the process to be surprised by something and to learn from it. And then lastly, we're going to go to implications. So what does this mean about, why we're here at the PDSA cycle? So we may have learned something specifically about the data and connections, but what does this tell us about the goal of our PDSA cycle and our change idea? And then also starting to think about, for that act phase, the phase that follows the study, what does this mean for our work moving forward? So that is the framing of this data discussion protocol. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is where I am going to check to see if Debbie is back, because she is the one who structured the specific data for the data review. I am so sorry.
Maybe Aubrey could talk a little bit.
That's an excellent idea. Aubrey, could you maybe talk a bit about the Hometown Ambassador Program and the PDSA cycle work you did on these data?
Yeah, sure. I have no idea what she was wanting to talk about, but
Aubrey, this
like
is
I said-
Jared speaking. Would you like me to share your PDSA in the chat or on the screen so you could sort of show people how you articulated your learning? Jared, is that appropriate?
I'm back. Is this any better?
Oh, much better.
Okay.
Just in time.
Okay, perfect. Okay. All right, so Aubrey told us all about this, and thank you very much, Aubrey. So next slide. All right, so our question today, and first of all, that picture on the left is one of the first 2 students with her former high school teacher at one of the visits. So that's December, and she shared her photo with me. Thank you, December. So our question is the program having a positive impact on students? And as Aubrey mentioned, there are 2 data sources, the teacher survey and then asking the students as well. Those are the 2 sources we're going to use. So next slide. All right, so first I have to do full disclosure. You'll see a note at the bottom that the graph is based on some actual data from PDSA cycles, as well as some fictional data for the purpose of this exercise. So just for an example, these slides show fall 2019 and spring 2020. Well, spring 2020, we had a pandemic and most of those visits just never happened. So I did some filling out of the slide and smoothing things out for the purpose of this exercise. So we want to, so there's 3 different sets here. The left side is the question asked to the teachers. How did this impact you as a teacher? And then asking the teachers, what was the impact on students? And then asking the students what the impact was on them. And then the light blue color is fall and the darker color is spring. So I would like you to look at the data and comment in the chat or out loud. Let's start with observation. So here we are making factual statements. What do you see?
Can you explain what the numbers on the y-axis
Yeah.
represent?
So the scale was from 1 to 5. For these, I think actually one of the questions technically was 1 to 4. But anyways, just assume that the scale was 1 to 5. So 1 being like low impact and high being 5 being high impact. So we're getting some comments in the chat. Teachers report a higher impact on students than students see on themselves. Teachers perceive more impact for students than themselves. So you're noticing there's some comparisons. There does seem to be a high impact on students. Erica, tell me which bar you're talking about.
I was looking at both the middle 2 bars and the right 2 bars to say that
Okay.
they're both near the top of the scale.
All right. All right, so let's move into interpretation. Some of you have already started doing some comparisons. Do you see any other trends or what do you not see that maybe you would have expected? So we see in the third set some growth between the fall and spring. Deb mentions, not sure if there's a significant difference in the teacher responses fall to spring. Yeah, that's probably not a significant difference because the sample size was pretty low. Must have been at least 1 to 5 or prorated as means are all above 4. So yeah, the scores are high. Teachers' impact on students and teachers was less in the spring than fall, but students' impact went up. Yeah, so those are great. And again, these are small numbers, so we don't know if these are significant differences, but we're practicing looking at the graph. Okay, so the last phase is interpretation. So what do these data tell us about our question? Is the Hometown Ambassador Program having a positive impact on students? And what do we want to do with this information going forward? Erica's hands are typing. So think about the question we had. Do the hometown visits have a positive impact on students? Erica says it appears to be strong. Curious how lasting it will be. Want more details. Scores are all about above 5. So this was one set of data from the Hometown Ambassador visits. Aubrey mentioned that the visitors, the ambassadors, also wrote some qualitative notes on their experience, and also the teachers had a place to put in comments. So in this case, there is more data that could be looked at to look at this question from several different vantage points. Oh, and then, yeah. So Sue-Ann says, what about it? What about the presentation was most impactful? So another PDSA cycle could drill into some of those questions a little bit more and maybe ask the students more detailed questions or ask the teacher.
Debbie,
Okay, so that,
just a tiny context, which is that because of COVID, we couldn't really do our Study Act cycle with this group. But what we were interested in were a trifecta of impact. So certainly the teacher and the students at Hometown High School, but some of our kind of hypotheses is moving from the helped to the helper So we're really interested on the impact of the presenters themselves
Yeah.
of doing something like this. So there is a lot of rich data inside those things. And in our analysis, we were kind of looking at outliers, like people who felt really terrible after their presentation versus people who felt great. What's the difference there? You know, teachers who said different stories, and then people who were visited who told different stories. And can we elicit from that why that might have been in our own journey to make this part of what just happens at all high schools in West Virginia and all universities? Thanks. Sorry, I love that.
Yeah.
So, thank
So
you.
I know this is what you had planned to do. So to bring everyone together, look at the data and then talk about it and look for ways to improve and continue doing it. All right, next slide. We're going to move into another example, and this time we're going to do breakout sessions. So in this case, we are going to be looking at the summer research internships that just happened this summer in 2020. They were virtual. Typically 2-week internships for entering freshmen and to get them authentic research experience. So our question that we are asking is, does participating in a summer internship have an impact on students' attitudes, beliefs, and knowledge related to their STEM pathway? And we are going to answer this question by looking at some pre and post surveys of student participants that were administered. Next slide. This graph comes straight from the first 2 evaluation year 2 report. So this is showing the results of the pre-post survey on 9 subscales. Each subscale has multiple items in it, multiple questions that were asked of the students participating. And let's see, there's 9 here. Of course, if you were doing this, you would want more information about what those subscales are, but for now, we're just gonna look at the title and just kind of guess. All of the questions were on a 5-point Likert scale, 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree. So a 5 is the maximum. And this one shows light blue is the pre-test, dark blue is the post-test. So next slide. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna break out and you will assign roles. So you need a facilitator who's going to ask the questions, and Sean is going to put a link to a Google Doc in the chat. So you will need to link to the Google Doc. When you go into breakout rooms, take note of what room number you're in, because when you go to the document, it's organized by room number. So your group will go to, group 3, and you'll type your notes there. So you'll need a facilitator, a timekeeper, and a note taker. And we are going to spend 12 minutes on this. So you have 12 minutes, and the Google Doc has the instructions. It has questions. It's a very brief amount of time, but you're going to try talking about the data. So with that, Sean is going to break us into groups.
Group 2, I accidentally wrote a little thing in yours, and then I think I erased it, but I got so confused. We were at the top, and sorry about that.
The page kept moving, and then at one point Michelle was recording on her sheet, but I thought we were on our sheet because it kept shifting, and I went, wait a minute, why is she in our room? And I went, oh, I'm on the wrong sheet.
I think all the groups should be closed, so I think we're good to go.
Yeah, are we all here? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, we are. Well, we have 1 minute for report out. I know it's a little awkward to jump into data where we didn't give you much context, but in 30 seconds, can you imagine being able to do this with data and make sense of it together?
I don't know if we're supposed to be talking or in the chat, but I think it was really, really helpful to have a structured time when we were presented with data and encouraged to focus on it together in this way. And I wonder if that is a practice, like a guided practice that we can build more formally into the steering committee and into the working groups with the help of SRI.
Yeah, and I will create a empty version of the data discussion guide, and we can all use it. And you can use it in anything. You can use it in your classes, in your life. Here's how to talk about data in a way that provides access and equity for everyone to be able to participate and to hear different voices. So our time is up. Thank you very much, and see you at the next session.
Thanks, Debbie and Jared, and huge thanks to Aubrey. I think she's gone now, but.
She was in our group. She had to go to class.
Okay, should I share here that PDSA that she gave permission for, or maybe I should share it on the discussion board on the website later because we lost people here?
Yeah, I think you should share it
Share it here.
somewhere. Share it on the discussion board.
Yeah.
So people can have a look at it as an example.
Would you
All
do
right,
that in steering, Sue-Ann? Or you could tell me later. Sorry, thanks,
Yeah.
Debbie.
Yeah,
All
no,
right, thanks, everyone.
All right, goodbye. I'm gonna end it. So you guys
Okay.
are gone. I'm sorry.
All right, bye.